For more than 4,500 years, it has stood in silence. Massive stones rising from the plains of southern England, some weighing over 25 tons, carefully arranged in a circular formation nearly 100 meters wide, perfectly aligned with the sunrise of the summer solstice, watching the sky, watching us. But what if Stonehenge was never just a monument? What if something has been hidden inside it this entire time, waiting for the right technology to uncover it? Now, using advanced AI-powered 3D scanning and ground-penetrating radar, researchers have begun mapping the stones and surrounding landscape down to millimeter precision. Not by digging, not by damaging the site, but by digitally reconstructing it, layer by layer. And what the data is revealing is forcing experts to rethink long-held assumptions. Stonehenge was built in stages between 3000 BC and 2000 BC, long before modern machinery, metal cranes, or advanced engineering tools. Yet recent scans have exposed internal fractures, hidden structural features, and underground anomalies extending several meters beneath the surface. Details that were never fully understood before. This isn't speculation. It's measurable data, digital models, verified imaging. And the results are surprising. Because what's being uncovered doesn't just reshape the story of Stonehenge. It raises serious questions about the engineering knowledge of ancient Britain. Before we reveal what AI has mapped beneath one of the world's most studied monuments, take a second to like and subscribe. This is one of those stories where the details matter, and you'll want to catch everything. Let's start with what we know. Stonehenge stands on Salisbury Plain, about 88 miles southwest of London. Built around 2500 BCE, the outer ring is made of massive sarsen stones, some standing nearly 30 feet tall, each weighing around 25 tons. Inside that circle are smaller blue stones, transported an astonishing 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales. The traditional explanation is familiar. Neolithic farmers, using antler picks, stone hammers, log rollers, and enormous community effort, slowly moved and shaped these stones over generations. No metal tools, no wheels, no written language, no advanced mathematics, just persistence, coordination, and religious or ceremonial motivation. That has been the accepted story for decades. And for a long time, that explanation felt sufficient, until researchers stopped asking how it might have been done, and started letting the data answer for itself. The Digital Investigation, a joint British-American research team, decided to move beyond theory. Instead of debating methods, they chose to digitally examine every inch of the monument. They used ground-penetrating radar to see below the surface, aerial LiDAR to map the landscape from above, photogrammetry drones to capture thousands of overlapping high-resolution images, and advanced 3D laser scanners to record every visible surface down to fractions of a millimeter. The result was a complete digital twin of Stonehenge, not just the standing stones, but buried remnants, fallen lintels, and the surrounding terrain stretching for miles. Then they went a step further. All that data, every scan, every groove, every angle, was fed into advanced neural networks trained to recognize patterns in ancient construction and acoustic engineering. What the AI came back with wasn't what anyone expected, and it started with something as simple as the surface of a stone. Precision that shouldn't exist. Under microscopic and three-dimensional surface analysis, the system detected at least 5 distinct stoneworking techniques used on the sarsen blocks. The first matched what archaeologists would expect: pecking and grinding with stone tools. Similar marks have been documented at other prehistoric sites. Nothing unusual there, but the geometry raised eyebrows. Some curved surfaces showed less than 2 millimeters of deviation across spans of 2 meters, roughly 6.5 feet. That level of consistency means the lintels, resting on top of the upright stones, form remarkably precise curves. Achieving just 2 millimeters of variation over that distance suggests careful planning and repeatable measurement, not random shaping. The second technique is where things became more difficult to explain. On specific surfaces, especially around the lintels and the tongue and groove joints, the AI detected shaping patterns that did not match known Neolithic tool signatures. Dr. David Nash of the University of Brighton noted that the uniformity of these sarsen stones exceeds what would normally be expected from traditional percussion and grinding methods. The curvature appears systematic, not accidental. When the AI compared these surface profiles against thousands of documented Neolithic tool marks from across Britain, it found 0 matches, not one comparable signature from the same era anywhere in the British Isles. Some researchers, including Dr. Mike Parker Pearson of University College London, caution against jumping to dramatic conclusions. Skilled builders can produce impressive results through experience and repetition. Practical geometry does not necessarily require formal mathematics. That is a reasonable argument. But here's the thing. Precision in stonework, even unexplained precision, could still be written off as extraordinary craftsmanship. What the AI found next was harder to explain away, because the researchers hadn't just built a picture of how the stones were shaped. They had built a model accurate enough to simulate something most people never consider when they think about Stonehenge: what it sounded like inside. Stonehenge as a sound machine. Stonehenge was never just a temple. According to this analysis, it may have functioned more like a machine. When the neural networks shifted from stone surfaces to sound behavior, the results surprised even the experts involved. One of them was Dr. Rupert Till from the University of Huddersfield, a researcher who has spent years studying the acoustics of ancient sites. He had long suspected that Stonehenge had unusual sonic properties, but when the AI completed its full acoustic simulation, the data reportedly went far beyond his expectations. Using the detailed 3D digital twin of the monument, the system reconstructed how sound would have moved inside Stonehenge roughly 4,500 years ago, when the full circle of stones was still intact. It modeled how voices, drums, and other low-frequency sounds would bounce off the sarsen stones and interact within the enclosed space. The analysis detected a phenomenon known as constructive interference. This happens when sound waves reflect off surfaces and overlap in ways that amplify certain frequencies rather than cancelling them out. According to the AI simulation, Stonehenge's specific spacing and stone geometry created amplification in a narrow frequency band between 95 and 120 Hz, roughly the range of a deep male voice or a large ceremonial drum. In practical terms, that means chanting or drumming at those frequencies could have reverberated powerfully through the circle. Instead of simple echoes, the structure would have reinforced the sound. The interior space would not just echo, it would resonate. The effect, according to the model, would have been intense and immersive. Here is where it becomes more striking. The acoustic amplification depended heavily on precision placement. The AI calculated that shifting even a single sarsen stone by as little as 1 meter significantly disrupted the interference pattern and weakened the resonance effect. In other words, the positioning was not loose or approximate. It had to be intentional. The system estimated that the probability of this specific acoustic optimization occurring purely by chance in a randomly arranged stone circle was less than 1 in 10,000. That figure suggests deliberate design rather than accidental alignment. If accurate, this implies that the builders of Stonehenge understood practical acoustic engineering principles long before such concepts were formally described in historical records. Formal acoustic theory would not appear until the time of the ancient Greeks, nearly 2,000 years later. Yet here, around 2,500 BCE, 25-ton megaliths were positioned in a way that created cathedral-like sound amplification. Skeptics offer a reasonable counterpoint. Any circular structure made of tall stones will naturally produce echoes and standing wave effects. That is true, but according to Dr. Till's observations, the difference at Stonehenge is not simply the presence of echo, it is the specificity. The amplification targets a narrow, meaningful frequency range rather than producing random reverberation. The comparison he suggested is simple. There is a difference between a room that happens to echo and a concert hall that is deliberately engineered to enhance sound. If the acoustic modeling holds up under continued study, Stonehenge may represent one of the earliest known examples of intentional, large-scale acoustic design, built not just to be seen, but to be heard. But sound was only one layer of the design. When the AI turned its attention from how the monument felt to how it was measured and laid out, it found something that pulled the timeline of human mathematics into question. Mathematics that predate mathematics. When the system began mapping the exact geometry of the monument, archaeoastronomer Dr. Gail Higginbottom at the University of Oxford reportedly noticed patterns that demanded a closer look. The neural networks had plotted the positions of every known stone, standing and fallen, along with features like the Aubrey holes and the station stones. Then they searched for measurable geometric relationships. What appeared were repeated right triangle ratios of 3 to 4 to 5. The proportions commonly associated with what we now call the Pythagorean theorem. Historically, that theorem is attributed to Pythagoras in ancient Greece around 500 BCE. Stonehenge dates to roughly 2,500 BCE, about 2,000 years earlier. And this was not a single triangle that could be dismissed as coincidence. The AI flagged at least 7 distinct, 3 to 4 to 5 relationships embedded in the layout, in the spacing of stone circles, in the geometric links between the Aubrey holes and the sarsen circle, and in the rectangular arrangement formed by the station stones. On top of that, the system analyzed the proportions of the sarsen circle itself. The relationship between its estimated diameter and circumference suggested a ratio close to 3.14 to 1, accurate to within about 99.7% of the true value of pi. For comparison, ancient Egyptian calculations are often cited at approximately 3.16 and Babylonian approximations around 3.125. If these measurements at Stonehenge were intentional, they would represent an extraordinarily close practical approximation in Neolithic Britain. Mainstream archaeologists offer an important counterpoint. Ratios like 3 to 4 to 5 can naturally emerge when builders use ropes, stakes, and simple geometric construction techniques. You do not need written mathematics to form right angles or circular layouts. Practical geometry can arise from hands-on problem solving. That's a fair challenge, and it's worth holding on to. But the AI investigation didn't stop at ground level. It turned its gaze upward, and what it found in the sky above Salisbury Plain added another dimension entirely. Reading the sky across generations. The AI reconstructed the night sky, as it would have appeared above Salisbury Plain in 2500 BCE and compared celestial positions to the monument's orientation. The most famous alignment is well known. On the summer solstice, the sun rises over the heel-stone when viewed from the center. That solar alignment has been documented for centuries. What the model highlighted beyond that was the 18.6-year lunar cycle, the time it takes for the moon's maximum declination to complete a full oscillation. This is not an obvious pattern. To recognize it, observers would need to track the moon's extreme rising and setting points consistently over nearly 2 decades. According to the analysis, the 4 station stones, arranged in a rectangle around the central circle, correspond closely to these lunar extremes. If accurate, achieving that level of alignment would require long-term astronomical observation and systematic record-keeping. It would imply that the builders were not only moving 25-ton stones, but also monitoring the sky with patience across generations. Critics argue that alignments can sometimes appear meaningful after the fact, especially in complex sites with many stones and sightlines. That is a fair caution. But one point remains difficult to dismiss. Recognizing and encoding an 18.6-year lunar cycle is not something achieved casually. It requires continuity, planning, and sustained attention over time. Using high-resolution scans, the AI separated construction phases by analyzing tool marks, erosion patterns, carving styles, and stone weathering. It grouped stones based on measurable differences in technique and surface aging. What emerged was not a steady evolution of skill, but the opposite. The earliest major phase, around 2500 BCE, which includes the first Sarsen circle and the towering trilithons, shows the highest level of precision. These stones have the tightest joints, the most refined shaping, and the most accurate astronomical alignments. They are the ones associated with the precise acoustic behavior, the embedded 3 to 4 to 5 geometric relationships, and the lunar cycle alignments. Later construction phases, stretching toward 1600 BCE, show something unexpected: declining craftsmanship. Tool marks become less consistent. Joints are looser. Alignments are less exact. The shaping appears cruder. By the final phase, the work is noticeably less refined than the earliest structures. That reversal challenges the usual pattern of human development. In Egypt, pyramid construction improved over time. In Greece, architecture became more mathematically sophisticated generation after generation. Most civilizations refine techniques as knowledge accumulates. At Stonehenge, the data suggests the peak came first, followed by gradual decline. One interpretation is that the original builders possessed specialized knowledge that later generations struggled to replicate. Perhaps traditions were passed down without full understanding. Perhaps techniques were preserved in ritual, but not in theory. The pattern raises questions about continuity and lost expertise. Dr. David Nash's team reportedly compared the earliest Stonehenge tool marks against more than 50,000 documented examples of Neolithic stonework across Europe. The earliest Sarsen shaping clustered as statistical outliers, showing characteristics more commonly associated with later Bronze Age craftsmanship, even though radiocarbon dating places them firmly in the Neolithic period. That tension creates a genuine archaeological puzzle. Either our interpretation of capability is incomplete, or we are underestimating what Neolithic societies could achieve. And if the precision of the construction is harder to explain than it first appears, the question of how these stones even arrived at Salisbury Plain is just as puzzling, because the AI had something to say about that too. The transport problem. The Sarsen stones originated about 25 miles north in the Marlborough Downs, The bluestones came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, roughly 150 miles away. The standard explanation involves log rollers, ropes, sledges, and large coordinated labor forces. But when the AI analyzed the shapes of the sarcens, it noted that many have irregular knobs and protrusions that would make rolling them unstable. Thousands of physics simulations were reportedly run using terrain models of Neolithic landscapes. In 92% of simulations, the stones tipped, jammed, or slipped during transport. Yet the 3D scans show little to no transportation damage. Protruding sections remain sharply defined. Some shaped details appear too precise to have survived repeated impact or uncontrolled rolling. That raises two possibilities. Either final shaping occurred after erection, which seems difficult in cases where carved features sit on surfaces hard to access once upright, or the transport methods were more controlled than we currently assume. The bluestones introduce another layer of complexity. Geological analysis confirms they were selected from multiple, specific outcrops across the Preseli Hills, not taken randomly from one quarry. Some researchers have suggested acoustic reasons. Certain bluestones produce bell-like tones when struck. The AI analysis added another observation. In their current configuration, the bluestones produce subtle, magnetic variations measurable at around 2 nanoteslas in the local geomagnetic field. This is an extremely small fluctuation, detectable only with modern instruments. There is no evidence that Neolithic builders understood magnetism in scientific terms, but the pattern of stone selection and arrangement continues to challenge simple explanations. So the stones themselves are full of puzzles, but the most dramatic findings weren't above ground at all. They were beneath it. What lies beneath? When researchers fed ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scans into the neural networks, the system began highlighting underground anomalies across Salisbury Plain. The 56 Aubrey holes, evenly spaced pits forming a near-perfect circle, have been known for decades. But the AI flagged something far larger. At least 200 additional post holes, pits, and buried features arranged in geometric patterns that had never been recognized as a unified design. Stonehenge, in this view, was never an isolated stone circle. It sat at the center of a ceremonial landscape stretching several square miles. And the landscape itself, it turns out, may not be entirely natural. By combining topographic LiDAR data with the acoustic modeling of the sarsen circle, researchers noticed that certain ridges and shallow valleys around the monument appear partially shaped rather than entirely natural. Some embankments show signs of large-scale earth movement. According to the simulation, these raised and lowered sections of land channel sound in specific directions. In practical terms, if someone stood at certain points outside the circle and produced loud rhythmic sounds, drumming, chanting, horns, the surrounding terrain would funnel that sound toward the monument. Once inside the circle, the sarsen stones would amplify it at targeted frequencies. The combined effect would have been dramatic. To someone standing in the center, it could feel as though sound was rising from the ground itself. The AI estimated that shaping parts of this landscape might have required moving hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of earth, using only antler picks and woven baskets, potentially thousands of workers over decades. And that effort would have come before the main stones were even erected, which raises the most important question of all. When you invest that kind of labor, across generations, across miles, you don't do it casually. You do it because the position matters, because you're building towards something. So what exactly were they building? What was Stonehenge for? One interpretation gaining attention is that it functioned as a kind of astronomical calculator. a physical system for tracking celestial cycles. The stone positions, sight lines, and buried post holes may have worked together to monitor solar and lunar movements, including the 18.6-year lunar cycle. If so, the monument could have helped predict eclipses and extreme lunar standstills. Its 1,500 years of maintenance and modification might reflect generations updating and preserving a long-term observational system. A more cautious view suggests that while alignments exist, interpreting them as a computer risks projecting modern concepts onto ancient practices. Still, the persistence of precise solar and lunar tracking is difficult to ignore. Some researchers have also explored correlations between lunar cycles and tidal or climatic variations. Long-term sky observation would certainly have been valuable to agricultural societies dependent on seasonal stability, even if the full picture of how that knowledge was used remains unclear. And here's what makes this story even bigger than Stonehenge itself. This wasn't happening in isolation. Around the world, in the same prehistoric era, other cultures were doing something remarkably similar. The global pattern, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built roughly 6,000 years earlier than Stonehenge, contains massive carved pillars aligned with celestial events. The Nebra sky disk from Germany depicts astronomical symbols linked to solar and lunar cycles. Newgrange in Ireland is precisely aligned with the winter solstice sunrise and has striking acoustic properties of its own. The Carnac stones in France feature more than 3,000 standing stones arranged in complex patterns spanning miles. Across Neolithic Europe, large stone monuments repeatedly show the same obsession: the sky, sound, geometry, and scale. Which means the question isn't just what Stonehenge was. The question is what it tells us about who we were and how much of that knowledge has simply been lost. It is also important to note that only about 5% of the Stonehenge site has been fully excavated. Non-invasive scanning continues to reveal buried ditches, pits, and possible chambers that remain completely untouched. As technology improves, more hidden features will come to light. Perhaps the most unsettling pattern in the AI's reconstruction is chronological. The earliest phase appears the most sophisticated. Later phases seem less precise. Whether that reflects lost expertise, shifting cultural priorities, or limitations in our own interpretation remains an open question. What is clear is this: Stonehenge represents far more planning, coordination, and long-term observation than the phrase primitive farmers suggests. The real surprise may not be that ancient people achieved the impossible, but that we are still discovering how capable they truly were. And the deeper we look, the more the monument seems to look back.